It was the kind of New York morning that pressed down on your chest like a weight you couldn't shake. The sky was a dull sheet of gray, and the rain wasn't heavy, but steady. Thin streaks that painted lines across every glass door and window in sight. The sidewalks glistened slick, umbrellas bobbed like dark flowers in the crowd, and everything, air, clothes, even thoughts, felt damp. Marcus Bell stood at the entrance of Langford Robotics, breathing in the heavy air before pushing himself forward through the revolving doors. He was already tired, though the day had barely begun. His light blue shirt clung to his back, pressed the night before with more hope than care, while a worn brown folder was tucked beneath his arm. The edges of the folder were soft, bent from years of use, carrying his whole story in resumes, old schematics, and scribbled notes. But the folder wasn't the most precious thing he carried. In his other arm, under the shelter of his second-hand jacket and the warmth of his chest, was his daughter Skylar, 3 years old. Sound asleep, her curls damp against his collarbone. Every breath she took rose and fell against him, small, steady, innocent, completely unaware of the storm her father was walking into. Marcus exhaled slowly, pressing his lips to her forehead before straightening his shoulders. He was early. He always made sure to be early, especially today. He crossed the gleaming marble lobby, shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. The security turnstile stood ahead, cold and impersonal, but no one stopped him. He had checked every detail, printed his confirmation email, memorized the directions, even called ahead. Still, the HR rep's words replayed in his mind like a warning bell. Bringing your child is not recommended. It's not professional. He had thanked her politely, ended the call, and sat staring at the phone, knowing she was right. But knowing didn't help. There was no daycare, no babysitter, no grandmother to step in. There was Skylar. There was him. And there was this chance. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding. Marcus stepped inside, adjusting Skylar carefully as she murmured in her sleep. He pressed the button for floor 12, the engineering floor, then pulled out his notes, flipping through formulas and reminders written in the margins. He didn't notice Skylar's eyes flicker open, curious in the dim light. He didn't notice her small hand reach out and press the glowing number again, canceling it with a soft beep, before poking at another button just because it shined brighter. 17. The elevator climbed smoothly, humming through the silence. Marcus was lost in numbers, rehearsing answers, promising himself he would not waste this chance. When the doors opened, he expected gray cubicles and engineers hunched over screens. Instead, the world before him was richer, quieter, and sharper than anything he'd imagined. The carpet was cream-colored, thick enough to swallow sound. The lighting was golden, warmer than the sterile bulbs below. Art pieces stretched along the walls, abstract, powerful, expensive. No workstations, no clutter, just authority. Marcus's chest tightened. He'd missed the floor. He whispered to Skylar, "Sorry, baby girl. We'll go back down." But her eyes had already widened with wonder. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging on his shirt. "Look. That lady looks like Elsa." Marcus followed her gaze, and froze. At the far end of the hallway stood Juliet Langford herself, the Juliet Langford, CEO of Langford Robotics. Ice blonde hair perfectly pinned, a white suit tailored so precisely it seemed sculpted, posture straight as marble. She was known for her sharp mind, her emotionless interviews, and her ruthless climb to the top. And now her eyes, cool, unreadable, were fixed directly on him. Marcus's first instinct was to retreat. He shifted Skylar higher in his arms and stepped back toward the still open elevator. "Let's just go, sweetheart. We weren't meant to be here." But Skylar wasn't afraid. She sat straighter, wide-eyed, voice carrying through the hush of the hallway. "Are you a robot?" Silence slammed down. An assistant froze mid-step. 2 staffers leaving a glass office turned, staring. "You're not smiling," Skylar added seriously. "Daddy says smiling makes people feel warm." Marcus's heart dropped into his shoes. He strode forward quickly, bowing his head, voice hushed and hurried. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Langford. She's 3. We hit the wrong floor. We'll be gone in 2 seconds." Juliet hadn't moved. She stood like stone, eyes fixed, hands behind her back. I had an interview," Marcus stammered, holding up his battered folder as proof. "Engineering floor, 12. This was just a mistake. We'll get out of your way." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the glass behind them. Then Juliet stepped forward, her heels sharp against the carpet. "You brought your child," she said evenly, "to a job interview." Marcus didn't flinch. "I didn't have anyone else, and I couldn't miss the chance." "There's always a choice," she replied, voice colder than the lobby air conditioning. He shook his head once. Not for people like me. Her eyes moved over him. The fraying shoes, the old watch, the folder clutched like it carried his whole life. Then she looked at Skylar. The little girl had gone quiet again, watching Juliet with the same innocent curiosity she'd shown the glowing elevator buttons. Juliet's gaze returned to Marcus, sharp as glass. "Do you think this is a place for games?" Marcus didn't answer. The elevator hummed softly, waiting. Rain streaked the tall windows. He stood there, father, job seeker, man out of choices, on the edge of something he couldn't name. The ride back down to floor 12 was silent. Skylar nestled into his shoulder, arms tight around his neck, unaware of the stares that had followed them, or the weight of her own words. But Marcus knew. He felt every ounce of it pressing on him like the gray sky outside. On floor 12, the waiting area looked nothing like the world above. Gray chairs, cold coffee, 3 other candidates with polished shoes and leather folders. Marcus felt every eye flick to Skylar as he approached the receptionist. "Marcus Bell," he said evenly. "Interview at 10. The woman's gaze lingered on his daughter. "You were told not to bring a child." "I remember," Marcus said quietly. "But I couldn't miss this opportunity. I had no other option." She gestured toward an empty chair. "Wait there." Marcus sat. Skylar slid into the seat beside him, rubbing her eyes. "Is this where you get a job, Daddy?" He managed a small smile. "That's the plan, sweetheart." A middle-aged man with a stiff tie soon appeared. "Bell." Marcus stood, folder in hand. Skylar hopped up beside him. The man frowned. "I was told your daughter wouldn't be here." Marcus's voice stayed calm. "I understand. Let's just get started." The interview room was stark. Long table, 2 chairs, whiteboard. Skylar climbed into a chair next to him before anyone could object. The man's jaw tightened. "I'd prefer we keep the focus on the interview." Marcus nodded. He knew already this wouldn't go well. The questions began. Degrees, certifications, gaps in employment. "I don't have a master's," Marcus admitted. "But I spent 8 years in automation before I stepped away to care for my wife. She was paralyzed after an accident. I became her caregiver full-time. She passed away 2 years ago." Silence. No sympathy. No nod. "I've applied to over 40 positions," he added, voice steady. "I'm not asking for pity. Just a chance." Before the next question, Skylar slipped from her chair and walked to the whiteboard. "Sweetheart," Marcus started, but she lifted a tiny finger. "Just 1 minute, Daddy." She picked up a marker and began to draw. Crooked lines, a round face, 2 stick figures, a rectangle between them. When she finished, she stepped back proudly. "That's my family," she announced. "That's me. That's Daddy. And that's Mommy. She's in the sky now, so we can't get bread from her anymore." Marcus's chest clenched. He closed his eyes briefly. No one had noticed Juliet enter. But now she stood in the doorway, watching silently, expression unreadable. Skylar looked up at her. "Do you have a mommy?" Juliet blinked once. "No," she said softly. "I don't," Skylar nodded. "Then you can share ours. Mommy in the sky says sharing is nice." Juliet's gaze shifted to Marcus, really seeing him for the first time. His eyes were tired but steady, a man who had carried more than a resume could ever hold. A scoff broke the silence. A senior engineer muttered, "Miss Langford, this is a business, not a daycare." "We're wasting time." Juliet's voice sliced through the room. "I think I'll be interviewing this candidate personally." She walked to the head of the table and pulled out the chair beside Marcus. Then, without hesitation, she pulled out another. "One for Skylar, too," she said simply. "She deserves a seat." Marcus stared at her, stunned. Skylar grinned, climbing into the chair like it was a throne. For the first time that day, Marcus felt the weight on his chest lift, just a little. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't in the wrong place after all. That night, long before dawn, Marcus sat under the dim glow of his bedroom lamp. Skylar slept curled in her crib, ragdoll tucked tight in her arms, forehead flushed with warmth. The apartment pipes clanged. Rain tapped against the window, steady as before. Juliet Langford's words echoed in his mind. "You brought a child to a job interview. There's always a choice. Do you think this is a place for playing games?" The email sat open on his laptop. Subject, challenge. Just 1 sentence inside. Solve the system optimization problem attached. 24 hours. Real engineering. No theories. Marcus stared at the problem, feeling the pressure rise. He had solved problems like this before, but never for a global robotics company. Never with so much at stake. To make sure Skylar was resting. But as she left, Marcus looked at her differently. Not as a CEO, not as a woman in charge of a billion-dollar company, but as someone who understood the kind of silence only loss could teach. And for the first time, Juliet realized she was not afraid of being seen. It started with a glitch, a minor fault in the diagnostic system of the company's newest human assist robot. A detail so small it could have gone unnoticed if it hadn't been flagged right before the product was due for a major investor demonstration. In the internal report, the blame pointed squarely at Marcus. The bug, according to the logs, had originated from a single line of code tagged with his credentials. The head of the development unit, Richard Green, a man with a polished smile and a long list of accolades, brought it to the leadership team's attention immediately. "He's a good guy, I know," Richard said with mock sympathy. "But this is a multi-million-dollar project. We cannot afford sentiment over standards." Word spread fast. By the time Marcus entered the conference room for the team meeting, heads turned. Some looked away, others stared too long. He knew that look, the quiet judgment, the whispered doubt. It was the same look he'd received when he first walked into Lanford Robotics with a toddler in his arms. Juliet wasn't in the meeting. She had been traveling that morning for an external board review. So, Marcus stood alone, facing a barrage of passive-aggressive questions and veiled accusations. "Care to explain why the safety override loop failed? Was your daughter with you during the last testing session? I mean, we all admire your resilience, Marcus, but this is real work, not daycare." He didn't defend himself. Not much anyway. Just sat there calm, the hurt buried under years of learning how to stay composed for someone smaller, watching him all the time. He knew he hadn't written that code, but he also knew proving it would take time. Time Juliet might not give him if she started to believe what they were saying. So, after the meeting ended, Marcus walked back to his desk, opened a clean document, and began typing his resignation letter. He only got to the second paragraph when the door to the conference room slammed open. Juliet Langford walked in. No coat, no entourage, just a folder in one hand and her expression unreadable. "Is this where we review performance failures?" she asked, her voice level. The room went silent. Richard Green stood. "Juliet, I was just about to brief you." "I've been briefed," she cut him off. She placed the folder on the table and looked straight at Marcus. "Come forward, Mr. Bell." Marcus rose confused. Juliet opened the folder. Inside was the back-end security audit from the system logs, showing a forced overwrite on the timestamp, showing that the faulty code had been manually inserted after Marcus had logged out. "Marcus Bell did not write that code," she said calmly. "But someone made sure it looked like he did." Gasps, shifting chairs, silence again. She turned to Richard. "The override was executed using your access credentials at 11:37 p.m. on a Sunday." Richard paused. "That's a mistake. I was home. I checked building access logs. You were here. I also checked the badge entry to the server room." Juliet's eyes were cold. "Now do not confuse my professionalism with blindness." "Richard, you're done." Richard tried to object, but security was already at the door. He left with his head down. Juliet then turned back to Marcus. "He's not just an employee," she said to the stunned room. "He's the man who reminded me I'm still human." A pause. Then she reached into her coat pocket and handed Marcus a new badge. "Congratulations," she said. "Head of Human-Centered Robotics Division, effective immediately." Marcus blinked, not sure whether to laugh or cry. Around him. The room stayed silent, but for the first time since he started, the silence was full of something else. Respect. They worked well together. It had been months since the day Juliet handed Marcus the division badge. And in that time, the team had changed. Meetings grew warmer, collaboration smoother, and Marcus, once the outlier with a child in his lap and yesterday's coffee stains on his cuffs, was now a pillar of innovation. He never demanded respect. He earned it. Juliet noticed the little things. How he listened more than he spoke. How he quietly fixed a junior engineer's mistake without pointing it out. How he left the lights on for the night staff and took Skylar's coloring books out of the main lab without being told. But it was Thesmala's gesture that stayed with her. She had been coughing for days, pushing through back-to-back meetings. Everyone noticed. No one said anything until she found a small box on her desk one morning, a jar of honey ginger tea, and a handwritten note for late nights that shouldn't be too cold. Monsieur Juliet stared at it longer than she meant to, then tucked it into her drawer like something fragile. A week later, Skylar wandered into her office during lunch. Juliet was alone reviewing prototypes when the little girl walked up and placed something on her desk. It was a drawing of Juliet with big eyes, yellow hair, and a heart on her chest filled with gears. "I made you this," Skylar said. "Because you always look a little sad but pretty." Juliet blinked, caught off guard. Skylar added, "Daddy says people like you don't always know how to rest." She took the picture gently, folded it with care, placed it next to the tea. Marcus never crossed any lines. Not once, but he was always there, quiet, steady, present in ways no machine could replicate. And that perhaps was what startled Juliet the most. She had built her world on control, systems, code, precision. But Marcus brought something she could not predict, something human. One Sunday afternoon, Juliet agreed hesitantly to attend a children's robotics exhibition Marcus had helped organize. She wore jeans. It felt strange. Marcus met her at the entrance, Skylar holding his hand tightly, her backpack bouncing as she walked. The exhibit was loud, chaotic, and colorful. Juliet hated crowds, but Skylar tugged her forward with excitement, leading her to a small booth decorated with crayon signs and glitter. On the table sat a tiny robot, no taller than a coffee mug made from recycled parts and a 3D printed casing. It had googly eyes and mismatched buttons. Juliet leaned in. "What does it do?" Skylar beamed. "Press the heart, Julietic." The robot lit up and said in a sweet robotic voice, "Will you marry my mom's heart?" Juliet froze. Marcus chuckled behind her, awkward but sincere. She insisted, said it would make you smile. I helped her with the wiring. Juliet turned around, emotions rising to the surface. Don't even know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Marcus replied. "I just wanted you to know you don't have to be perfect or untouchable or in control every second." He paused. "You can let yourself be loved like Apperson, not a machine." Juliet stared at him, then at Skylar, bouncing, humming with joy. And something in her broke, or maybe softened. "If it's someone who loves the machine parts and the broken circuits," she whispered. "Then maybe yes." Marcus reached for her hand. She let him. The robot blinked and said again, "Will you marry my mom's heart?" Skylar squealed. She didn't say no. Juliet laughed, truly laughed. She read on Tristan. It wasn't a grand proposal. No candles, no music, just a tiny voice, a hand-drawn heart, and a woman learning finally how to be human again. 1 year later, the Langford Robotics rooftop garden bloomed in soft lavender and white. It was a quiet Sunday. No press, no spotlights, just the people who mattered. Engineers in wrinkled suits, HR staff wiping tears. Junior developers snapping photos with tissues in hand. The company that once stared at a man with a child now stood when he entered with admiration. Skylar stood at the aisle's end clutching a bouquet of purple daisies. Her white dress puffed like a cloud. She insisted on being the flower girl and ring guardian and happiness boss. Her words. Juliet stepped out from the main office. No iPad, no assistant, just her. A simple ivory dress, loose curls, and tucked behind one ear a fresh sprig of lavender. Her eyes met Marcus's. For the first time, she walked towards someone. Not with a pitch, but with an open heart. Marcus wore a navy suit, plain but dignified. His eyes carried the weight of a man who once stood in a job interview with no hope left in his chest. Now he smiled like sunrise. As she reached him, wind brushed through her veil. Someone whispered, "She's glowing." The ceremony was short. Notchoir. No orchestra. Just soft piano and wind chimes Marcus had made from Skylar's old toy parts. When it came time for vows, Marcus's voice trembled. "I once thought I'd lost everything," he said, "but life was clearing space. So I could meet you, so my daughter could have a mother who knows what it means to feel alone and choose love anyway." Juliet blinked back tears. He slid the ring onto her finger, then whispered, "I used to think love could break me, but with you I learned it can also rebuild." Skylar called out, "You forgot to say I do." They laughed. Juliet nodded, never looking away. "I do." Then Skylar ran to them, hugged their legs, and beamed. "I have a dad and now a mom who's a robot that can love." Everyone laughed, even Juliet, especially Juliet. The reception was simple. Foldable chairs, warm food, the company canteen dressed in fairy lights and cookies. Skylar danced barefoot with the IT team. Marcus served drinks. Juliet sat and just watched. Watched her team laugh. Watched her husband hold their daughter. Watched her world become something messier than algorithms, but infinitely more. He closed the laptop softly and looked back at Skylar, her doll limp in her arms, her breathing steady and shallow. Carefully, he slipped out of bed. No modern equipment, no tools. His old home rig was barely functional. Still, he called Alexis, a friend from college. She said yes, he could borrow her unused workstation. He bundled Skylar into her coat, carried her to the living room couch. She stirred, rubbing her eyes. "I'm hungry, Daddy, I know, love." He kissed her forehead, then warmed some milk and poured a small bowl of cereal. She ate slowly, curled back under her blanket, dozing off again. Marcus turned on a desk lamp. Rain tapped harder now, like a warning. The screen glowed weakly. He opened the file Juliet had sent and began. Code, algorithms, logic, system, memory, thresholds. His fingers moved steadily, fumbling only when fatigue set in. Twice Skylar woke with fever. He stopped everything, held her close, whispered, "I'm right here." He wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, stayed beside her until her breathing slowed again. He returned to the desk. The code blurred, his eyes burned, but he remembered Juliet's challenge, not theories, real-world constraints, real deadline. He sipped reheated coffee from a chipped mug. His back ached, his mind spun with numbers and worries, rent, bills, Skylar's cough, the job. Then he saw it, the drawing Skylar had made, still taped beside the fridge. Stick figures, one floating, two below, hands held. Family, she'd written. He stared at it for a long second, touched the paper lightly, then went back to work. Midnight passed. Outside, the city blurred behind rain-streaked windows. When Alexis's computer froze during simulation, he switched to hand-drawn circuit paths. When the code failed, Hedda-bugged and rewrote it. Every time something broke, he fixed it. Every time exhaustion dragged at him, he remembered Skylar. At 4 a.m., he paused, looked at her, curled in her blanket, cheeks flushed from sleep. He whispered into the quiet, "We have to fight as a team tonight." "Just us." He brushed a curl from her forehead. She murmured, tugged her blanket tighter. Back at the desk, Marcus compiled the final version. Optimized pipeline, code comments, circuit diagrams, a clean write-up, no frills, just truth and precision. At 6 Jenga Oipe, he hit send. Subject, "Your optimization solution, Marcus Bell." He exhaled. Skylar stirred on the couch, opened one eye, then both. He held her just for a second, and as the new day began at Langford Robotics, Marcus Bell sat quietly, hands folded, shoulders squared, ready to prove that being a father didn't make him less. Maybe, just maybe, it made him more. The office was still dark when Marcus pressed send. Timestamp 6:58 a.m., IM just under the wire. He leaned back, hands trembling from too little sleep and too much coffee. Skylar stirred beside him on the couch, still wrapped in a blanket, tiny fingers curled around his coat. He had done everything he could. Across Thessaly, high above Manhattan, Juliet Langford entered her office on the 17th floor. She declined coffee, opened her laptop, and spotted the subject line, "Technical Solution Proposal, 24-hour submission." She hesitated only briefly, then clicked. Lines of code, schematics, simulations, calculations, a scanned handwritten circuit diagram, smudged butyligant in its precision. She opened the original problem, the same one 3 Ivy League grads had failed to solve. He had done it. No shortcuts, no guesses, everything precise, every edge case covered. And then he went further. A new logic controller. Simpler, cheaper, smarter. A solution born of experience, not theory. At the bottom of the file was a quiet note. "Thank you for the chance to be seen. Marcus Bell." Juliet sat back, fingers tented. She stared at the final page in silence. By 9:02 a.m., she had gathered her department heads. She slid the file across the table without a word. They skimmed, whispered. One of them looked up. "Who's this from?" Juliet folded her arms. "The candidate we almost dismissed because he didn't have childcare." Silence. Then something rare. Juliet smiled. Slight but real. "The problem wasn't that he brought his daughter," she said. "The problem was that we almost missed a genius. Because he did." Marcus knew none of this when the call came. He had just microwaved soup for Skylar, still sniffling from the night before. Juliet's voice was calm, direct. "We'd like to offer you a part-time consulting role. Remote work allowed. And if you need to bring your daughter, we'll make space." Marcus blinked. "I thank you. You won't regret it." "I know, 2 months passed." Marcus arrived at 7:45 a.m. sharp, Skylar's hand in his. Some days she wore mismatched socks or carried her stuffed rabbit. Cold mornings he'd carry her in half asleep wrapped in his coat. He was never late, never complained, never drew attention. He coded quietly, submitted clean solutions, helped fix issues that weren't his responsibility. He stayed late without being asked, never sought credit. Juliet began to notice. Each morning Skylar was in the waiting area, reading, coloring, or napping on a folded blanket. Marcus always at his desk, focused, still, steady. No self-pity, no excuses. Just the quiet determination of someone who had once solved the unsolvable overnight with a sick child and a borrowed laptop. One morning, Juliet found a revised circuit diagram on her assistant's desk, improved and cost reduced. "Who did this?" she asked. "Marcus," the assistant replied. "He stayed after hours, said he had an idea." Juliet said nothing, but later she paused outside his workspace. Skylar was humming, coloring on scrap paper. Marcus was coding, head down, lips moving faintly as he double-checked syntax. Juliet watched them both in silence, and something inside her shifted. This time she didn't push it away. The night had crept in quietly. blanketing the glass towers of Langford Robotics in muted silver. Most employees had already gone home. The halls were quiet, cold, efficient, just like Juliet preferred them. She walked out of her office, coat over one arm, phone still in hand, reciting numbers in her mind. But just as she pushed open the main doors, a faint sound broke the silence, singing soft, off-key, childlike. She turned. At the bottom of the steps sat Skylar, curled up, her tiny legs swinging gently, lips moving to a tune only she knew. Her shoes had come undone. Her cheeks were pink from the chill. In her lap, she held a crumpled napkin with a faint drawing on it. Juliet descended the stairs slowly. "Where's your dad?" she asked. Skylar looked up, startled at first, then smiled faintly. "He's still inside finishing something." Juliet glanced back toward the building. Skylar added almost in a whisper. "He said, if I ever get hungry, I should sing. So, I don't feel it as much." Juliet froze. There were reports to read, calls to return, a board member waiting for her decision on a new acquisition. But none of it mattered in that moment. "Come with me," she said. They walked together back inside, Skylar skipping slightly, still humming. Juliet led her to the company cafeteria where the lights were half dimmed and the staff had already started closing down. A few familiar faces looked up in surprise as the CEO walked in with a child. Juliet simply said, "A bowl of tomato soup and some bread, please." Skylar sat at the table, legs swinging again, watching Juliet with wide eyes as the tray was placed in front of her. Juliet didn't speak much. She just sat beside the little girl, watching her eat with small, careful spoonfuls. When Marcus finally came rushing in, breathless, he froze at the sight. His daughter sitting beside the CEO, sipping soup like it was the most normal thing in the world. "I'm so sorry," he began. Juliet looked up, then gestured toward the seat across from them. She was hungry, that's all. He sat down slowly, unsure of what to say, but there was nothing to defend, nothing to apologize for. They ate together in silence. A quiet, warm kind of silence. The kind that only happens when three people who have lived too long on opposite sides of life find themselves sharing a table, not out of obligation, but out of something simpler, human. But good things, even small ones, do not go unnoticed. By the following week, whispers had started. "She's falling for the guy with the kid," someone said in the elevator. "It's just a charity case. Watch. He'll be gone once she gets bored. Can you believe she lets him bring the kid here? What is this, daycare?" Worse, someone snapped a picture of Skylar asleep on a beanbag in the quiet room. Her hand still wrapped around a stuffed robot. They posted it to the internal chat group with the caption, "Future CEO." Juliet saw it all. And without saying a word, she called an emergency HR meeting that evening. No press, no theatrics, just a quiet, direct confrontation. She stood before the team, her voice steady. "Kindness is not a liability. This is not a place where we shame children or parents or decency." All posts were deleted. Warnings were issued, and the gossip died down quickly. One night, Skylar came down with a fever. Marcus texted in to say he wouldn't be able to make it to work. 20 minutes later, Juliet was in her car, driving through steady rain to a modest apartment on the east side. She knocked once. Marcus opened the door, confused and startled. "I brought medicine," she said simply. He stepped aside. Juliet sat beside Skylar's bed, helped lower her temperature with damp cloths, read her a story from a wrinkled picture book, and softly rubbed her back until her breathing evened out. Marcus stood in the doorway, arms crossed, silent. Finally, he said, "You're not the robot they say you are." Juliet gave a quiet laugh, one not many had ever heard. "I was a child no one waited for. I know what that feels like." She didn't stay long after, just enough. Beautiful. As the sun set, Marcus led her to the rooftop's edge, below New York's lights, above the first snow falling gently. Just like the morning they met. Juliet leaned into him, no longer afraid to lean. "Do you remember?" Marcus whispered when she asked if you were a robot. Juliet smiled, and I didn't even smile back. "You do now?" he said. "And it's my favorite part of you." She touched his chest. "And you? Do you remember how scared you looked?" "I do," Marcus said. "I was about to lose everything." He kissed her forehead. "But I didn't. I found you and we found each other." Behind them, Skylar called out, "Come back. The cake has sparkles." They laughed, turned, and walked back hand in hand toward their daughter, their people, and the soft lights of a life that was finally theirs. The last scene, a family of three stepping out of Langford Robotics together. No one stared, no one whispered, because by then everyone had learned love does not need permission or perfection. It just needs room and sometimes an extra chair. If this story moved you just a little, don't forget to subscribe for more tales that heal and inspire. Every view, every share, and every tap on the hype button helps us bring more light into the world. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us of love, resilience, and quiet courage. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep your heart open.